thanks everyone for joining the developer community call for adaptive cards. I'm Matt Heidinger. I didn't get to check if David's on this call, but we both work on the adaptive cards team. And this is our opportunity to really meet with the community, share kind of what the team's been working on every month. Ideally, we have demos. Today is really going to be a recap. I think both David and I know I'm taking the next 2 days off right after this call. We just wrapped up the build session yesterday. So that recording is here. It's a perfectly nice still that I have paused it at. And so if you haven't seen the session, you're about to get a bit of a recap of it, but this is where this YouTube I'll have a link here, but I just Googled it. So if you just search for adaptive cards at Build 2019, this will come up. But yeah, so David and I just had the opportunity to really present what the team has been doing for the last year since the last build. And this call is going to be a recap. Hopefully it's stuff you haven't seen. We wrote a lot of code and a lot of demos, and it was such a jam-packed session that we didn't really get to cover all the details. So that's at least teed us up for a lot of content for at least the next couple months. We went into some really advanced topics that I'll kind of get into. And before I get right into that, this is the last piece. My team, I know I left despite me saying I'm taking a couple days off. It was a super energizing conference. Like we met with so many just random people. Adaptive cards went from something, David and I were kind of prototyping, thought this might be a neat idea, into a product that people are actually using. And so meeting with people in the real world and helping us guide it has just been really cool to see people are actually taking it in the directions that we didn't realize. So please do reach out to us. We'd love to set up just 30-minute one-on-one calls. You can email me, matt.heidinger@microsoft.com. And we're kind of active in, if you haven't seen some of the previous month's calls, we've been doing these since January. We did adaptive cards recaps all the way up to 1.1 release, 1.2, and then we're currently in the 2.0 preview. I think I see my dev lead Shalini on the call. I don't know the exact status on 1.2. We're releasing it at least within like this time frame. So it's either released already and you can get started playing with 1.2, or it'll be out pretty soon. And 1.2's got some pretty neat enhancements in it that we'll kind of get into. So hopefully with that, Dana, if you're able, since this is my kind of one screen, so if there are questions and people want to just type them up, please do. This is going to be even more ad hoc than some of the other monthly calls. I'm just going to kind of go through it all. And if anyone wants details on something, I'm happy to do that. And if you have content that you'd like to see in a future community call, I think that'd be great as well. I sent an invite to one of our partners that we demo at Teamwork. I don't know if he's able to join the call, but we want to make these community calls, not necessarily all of us at the product team sharing with you. If you've used adaptive cards for something and want to just share how you did it or how you built it, something that you think the community would be useful, shoot me an email. And, we're happy to give time to this to really kind of share what you've been doing as well. So with that, the session was all about adaptive cards vNext. We did a quick recap. I can't really assume that all of you know what adaptive cards are. So we do quickly like to do, a short recap all the time. We really like to think of adaptive cards folks in either one of two camps, sometimes both, the more we've kind of refined this, but you're typically possibly a card author and you're putting a card into another app, like a Microsoft experience, possibly like Outlook or Teams, and you're writing bots. As an example, on our team, we use a GitHub bot, we use Azure DevOps bots. So these are all adaptive cards powered by GitHub. As the pull requests come in, I can click add comment. I can merge this pull request. When an issue is in there, I can actually assign it labels and things. So if I don't know if we have an issue created in here where I can show you that It's just some of the power of adaptive cards. So they're obviously good here at displaying content, but they are actionable. You can take action. So here's an issue that was opened. And so we use labels. So this platform is on Android. So if I wanted to right here label this issue with area or platform dash Android, I could do that right here and save that back. So this is basically going back to GitHub and oh, of course I didn't authenticate in that one, but kind of showing, you know, this interaction where GitHub takes some of their experiences and they decided to integrate it into a bot. I believe GitHub also has an actual message, so I could take actions on it in Outlook. So those are adaptive cards. They're authored by JSON. Everything at Adaptive Cards, we hope you've seen or at least heard of, but everything you'd want to get started is just adaptivecards.io. That's our documentation. You can see a designer, and you can author a card and preview what it looks like in multiple apps. So hopefully that's just a quick lap around adaptive cards for card authors, and then the host applications are the ones who actually render the apps. So we have a number of SDKs that let whatever platform you're on, from .NET to Android to iOS to JavaScript, even a framework above that, for example, React Native or Flutter, we have rendering libraries to make sure that you have an adaptive card and it's received. A key gist that we were really trying to get through, and this is the main demo that we built for the talk. When I said people, like the community really surprised us, we really mean it. I wish I could mark all these slides as red. You can see the newness. People started to build adaptive cards just to power a bunch of forms. So this was an ISV who came up to us probably 2 builds ago and said, you know, you showed a lot of bots, showed a lot of Outlook. We have 400 or so of these forms that we store in a database, and we need to display on Android and iOS, and maintaining them is a lot of work and a lot of cost. Would adaptive cards be good for that? And we were like, well, this is before we had an integrated designer, so they were kind of coming up with their own thing, and it was before we had data binding, so you couldn't really apply data, but they did that just because these forms were serializable because they're in JSON, and the rendering SDKs made it very easy to just render those things. So it was a total use case we never really thought of, but helped that business achieve a lot of their goals by just rendering these forms on every platform. So this is a screenshot of the app that I built. I can actually real quick try and plug in this tablet and we can see a live demo of it. But as I'm going through this, the point I'm bringing all this up is that build was a great forcing function for us to actually build out some of these case studies. So we effectively recreated a lot of these experiences, and I of course can't find the right USB cable. We might have to wing that one. The source code for this, including the Android app, and another scenario people started doing was building entire dashboards. So this is an adaptive card dashboard. You'll see it right here. We basically built this fictitious Contoso healthcare clinic. And in the talk, you would actually see a kind of neat scenario. This is exactly what adaptive cards shines at. So the scenario we built out was a healthcare network that has multiple providers in the same network, different levels of IT support, different software stacks, but they all have to communicate. So the general practitioner, through the talk, built a bot. We go through a referral step where you basically refer a patient. You're looking for physical therapists, so the bot searches for physical therapists. It finds one in your same network and then generates a referral form, all in the bot, all in Teams. And then I'm able to refer that patient to a physical therapist. That referral is what shows up here, and we actually built that and showed how it goes around. And then this effectively is the physical therapist portal who is now displaying that referral. And I can say, okay, this person wants to be treated for physical therapy. We can schedule that appointment, and you can see here's my adaptive card filling in with data, and eventually it'll go from a pending referral over into appointments. And you can pretty much envision this as just the scheduling manager's dashboard, all kind of powered by adaptive cards. So the source code for this, I will walk through it, and I'll go into detail as we can, or as we want to. I wish actually I guess I could awkwardly hold this tablet up to the camera. You guys will have to tell me if that's beneficial or not. We'll try that because I can't seem to find a USB cable. But so the source code of this, we didn't quite, I haven't quite finished it yet, but it'll be a GitHub repository, I'd say within a couple weeks, just to give myself a little bit of buffer. But this is kind of an end-to-end kitchen sink, everything about adaptive cards, from the simple, how do you render the card, all the way to, and how do you style it, to really advanced stuff to show that the schema is extensible, and we extend it such that, I'll just kind of awkwardly hold it up here, maybe if you could see it, I don't know. But there's an additional button in there. It's the same appointment template, but this tablet has an additional function. It's got a touch screen, and it's got the ability to check in. So when I click check in on this, I'm able to complete a form, and it basically just gets at that the schema can be extended, and then you can use the rendering libraries to extend it. So the point in all this, it's a really complicated, it's got a lot in there. There's an admin interface where I can easily update these forms, and obviously you can see I changed this on stage, but I could say welcome to Contoso Physical Therapy. And I click save. It's all integrated into this portal. It's now saved that card in the database. And when the Android app relaunches it and I click check in, it'll say welcome to Contoso Physical Therapy, if you can see that. So I've pushed this form down to this tablet all by integrating that designer and clicking save. So it's kind of a neat end-to-end scenario, and all that code will be available. So again, these were scenarios where we didn't really have them in mind with adaptive cards. People came to us and said, this is neat, this is what we wanted to do. And then that led to just building this app to help other people maybe experiment with some of the more advanced scenarios with adaptive cards. So next, we talked about Teams. Teams worked with adaptive cards for bots, but then they started applying it to a whole bunch of places in extensibility in Teams. I'm actually going to skip this demo for this. This was a cool demo, and I'm going to see if I can pressure our friends at Teamwork. I don't know if he's on this call, but I'm going to see if I can get him. It'd be better if it came from him. He helped me build this build demo, and I think it'd be cool if he was able to share that with you in a little more detail, maybe next month. This is a similar note. We just started seeing cards in developer tools, including the demo I gave probably in March, I think, where I hacked away at the GitHub desktop app to integrate my Azure stats. Just kind of using adaptive cards in neat scenarios. And then we spent some time with this animation. Oh, let me actually change screens here. Swap. Hopefully that will swap. So this led us to refine the value prop of adaptive cards, and where we think if the scenario is something you're having a challenge with in your daily software needs, this is where adaptive cards may help you. So the scenario we're focusing on, the scenarios across all the board, what all those ones have in common are when you have snippets of interactive and exchangeable content. So the content, as we've seen, because it's JSON serialized, it can be exchanged around through the cloud or through any other mechanism that blend natively with the surroundings. So if an adaptive card does its job right, you wouldn't really be able to tell it from the rest of the app. If I'm rendering a WPF app, the demo I give it build, I'll tell this story for 2 seconds. I realized we weren't the first person at Microsoft to come up with Contoso Healthcare. As I was building up this fake app, I saw that maybe it was like build 2016. Someone had written a WPF and UWP app, and it's a pretty visually nice looking healthcare app to just demonstrate, I'm sure, a number of WPF and UWP features. So to show that how easy it is to render an adaptive card in there, I just pulled down their GitHub repo, and it's a few lines of code to install the NuGet package and render the adaptive card. And the gist is that you just can't tell where the adaptive card is in the rest of the content. It renders natively and it blends natively with the surrounding app. That's just a key thing that we know apps that use adaptive cards needs. If you're in Teams, you want all the Teams, especially in Teams users, expect all that content to look and feel the same, even though hundreds and thousands of people are writing bots and it's coming from unknown third parties, the content looks and feels and blends natively. Into any experience. And this is where we ship these SDKs. You would go to our GitHub to get started. You would install any of these SDKs. Then we follow the same basic pattern to render adaptive cards in any platform or all of these platforms. We did have an exciting announcement at this point. I think this community call has been a little bit aware. This is another opportunities that I'm going to ask people if they'd like to join our community call and maybe share. But Neo Helden is a group working on a digital assistant for, I believe, the workplace. But their entire app experience is built on Flutter, but they still use adaptive cards to render the content inside of Flutter for certain scenarios. And Imaginea has been one of our first key partners. A couple weeks ago, I personally had the exciting moment of getting to add them as write contributors of the GitHub repository. So they're the first non-Microsoft community members with write access to our repo. They've just been incredible partners. Both of these groups are committing to updating and keeping these renders current with future adaptive cards versions. So these aren't just going to be stuck on a particular version. So as 1.2 is coming out, we'll keep working with them to make sure the React Native one in particular, I believe is up to date with all the 1.2 features. And some of them are pretty advanced and compelling, like this, particularly the fallback scenario and action toggle visibility and things like that. So we're really excited about that. That it just kind of goes to show that even if you're investing in cross-platform and using a cross-platform framework like Flutter or React Native, adaptive cards can still help achieve that. The little pieces, the snippets. Adaptive cards are not about rebuilding your entire app cross-platform. It's about just sharing certain pieces of it that maybe should go in your app or other experiences like leveling up into Teams or Outlook. So hopefully that all makes sense. Dana, have there been any questions, or should I just keep plugging along?
Andrew is talking through the IM with Tony, so
okay.
I think we're
so you guys
okay
are good
for now.
Okay,
Yep.
Great. Feel free to interrupt anyone as you want to. So that was exciting. We did have some Outlook actionable messages announcements as well. If on the keynote, we got to see Outlook on iOS, I think is available now, and Android is coming in, well, it says later this year. So this is really cool, and they announced the SurveyMonkey scenario. I know I'm personally really excited about surveys and actionable messages. My team, Andrew in particular, has really taken this. He's been a shining example on our team of the value that surveys can be in just providing how are people using things. We've been conducting focus groups. And the trick with surveys is you either have to convince someone to do it. You just want to minimize all the friction, obviously, to getting those services back. So if a survey can be delivered into my inbox and I don't have to click on a link, I don't have to click on a form, I don't know what I'm getting myself into by clicking that link. If it is presented right in my inbox, me as just one individual user, I probably will increase my response into surveys. So I'm particularly excited about that interaction. So we saw some actual messages stuff. We saw partner AppBot. AppBot was one of the first community calls I think we talked about. The AppBot one is just another shining example of we aren't just saying that we want to hear from you. AppBot found us, Joe in particular, who's the co-CEO, found us at Ignite, said, hey, we have a platform that lets businesses build bots without writing code. They kind of just, they built tools and frameworks to just really help a non-developer write a bot for somewhat simple and things, but they use Flow, they integrate with Flow, they integrate with adaptive cards. But adaptive cards were just a great front-end experience. We had a designer at adaptivecards.io. It wasn't the worst thing in the world to say, okay, go to adaptivecards.io, design your card, and then maybe like paste it into AppBot. But they were just like, hey, couldn't you guys make this a library that we can consume a JavaScript and then embed it into their portal? And that's effectively exactly what I show here in this demo, where the designer, I click on edit any one of these cards, the designer loads up, I can design the card and hit save. All integrated. I didn't leave it adaptivecards.io. So that designer And this app demonstrates I can tweak a lot of things too. I can add to the toolbar. I couldn't quite find an icon in time. These are things I'll polish up. But that save button, I added that to the toolbar. So it's a library like anything else. You install the library. It's got an API to modify things, and you do whatever you want with the designer. We're just here to provide the building blocks and kind of get out of your way. So AppBot was just a great example of, we didn't think anyone needed an integrated designer, and then they asked for it, and within a couple of weeks they had integrated into their portal. And that kind of gets into the rest of it. So the rest of it was this Contoso Healthcare Network, which I'll happily run through. Like I mentioned a handful of times, the source code for this will be available. It's relatively straightforward. I tried not to use any frameworks, so it's just a plain JavaScript app with, it renders cards and it handles some interactivity. So that's what we went through. So before if I bop around in here, this is kind of just, we did the demo. So cool. Then let me spend the rest of the time really walking through the gist of this Contoso clinic and how it was built, some of the scenarios we're enabling in 1.2, and then some of the scenarios that we're adding in 2.0. So let me actually take 1 second and see if I can, let me wander back to my, I know I've got a million USB cables in here. Let's see if we can plug in this Android device while we're getting situated. I wasn't able to project this at build, so we had to do the kind of awkward, I held a camera and pointed it at him. Okay. So, I'll see if that loads up. We'll cross our fingers, see if I'm able to project the Android device. If not, we can kind of talk through it. Android Studio, in case anyone wants to see that code. So here was the gist. The first thing we did is talked about, if any of you are writing adaptive cards today using the 1.0 or 1.1 schema, you can't actually achieve some of the visual niceties that this card is displaying. So it's not the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, but it demonstrates a couple features that we've added in the 1.2 release. So, for example, containers. We had colors on text, as you can see here, so you could use a set of semantic colors like good, warning, attention. We added them on container styles, and so if I click on plus here, it's going to generate a random referral with a random name, and it's random whether they'll be insured or not. So the card I wrote is, if they're not insured, we just kind of put this little block here. Because it's the United States and insurance is a key thing, so we draw attention to it. And I show that this should be treated as high priority. That's just what I put in, but I'm rendering in this monospace font. This was a pretty neat request by some Teams bot developers. If you want to put, say, command line output in a card, this is a great way. Just now you can say, I want this text to be styled as monospace. You can see we have this region here where the container style that we've always had emphasis, that's drawing this emphasis something. We can say it bleeds now, so you can create this horizontal rule effect, just adding a little bit more to the visual appearance and nicety of the card. And this action here is an action toggle visibility. So I declare it, and we can walk through some of this card. This is just showing that, okay, we can have an action that passes in an array of element IDs, and those element IDs, it simply toggles the visibility and lets you create a little bit more interactivity. A piece that we're pretty excited about, let me actually go in here because I think I didn't reset the demo. If I go to the admin side and I click on referral, well, this is the adaptive card template that we were just looking at. And what I added, this unfortunately did get removed from our 1.2 release. What I'm about to show is validation. Let me actually turn that off to show the end-to-end scenarios that it adds some pretty cool value. We weren't confident that we had the validation story completely right, so we did what I believe is the right thing, and we delayed it until next release. So it's available in this designer. When you install 1.2, you won't see this input validation, but it will be available. It'll probably, because we've already started on it, it'll probably be one of the first features that comes in the 1.3 preview. Most likely, obviously, in these community calls, you're seeing that product development is like anything else. We do our best to plan things, but I'm not making any guarantees on that. But the bummer here, so let's say, okay, I want to schedule this thing. I pick a date. I say, okay, what room are they going to be in? And they're going to be with Dr. Katie, Dr. Pinardi. And I hit okay, but I forgot to select the time. And so it's going to hit okay, the referral disappears, or refresh the appointment. So now, oh man, I've got a bug here. So we didn't have client-side validation. Obviously, you guys can, if you're following along, probably know where this is going. As I edit that template again, all in here, I can say this is required. I can say on any input, this is required. I can say this one is required. And we even have this optional piece. We could say required with visual cue, and that puts some sort of indicator that's appropriate to the platform. That's the trick with adaptive cards. Anything we add to adaptive cards needs to render anywhere, including, on the most primitive type thing. So adaptive cards is based on relatively, primitive building blocks, but we want to respect the platform we're on. So if you say in your card you want a visual cue, we will do what is the most expected thing on the platform you're on. For example, if I show this date picker, this is how a browser, in fact, this is how Edge, the Edge version I'm in, renders it. If we actually open this up on a different browser, you'd get a different date picker. We're just using the platform's date picker. If you open this up on an Android phone, you get the native Android date picker. Same thing applies with our validation and our and this visual cue. But now, if I forget that time and hit OK, you see that I get validation failures. So we're adding a little bit of client-side validation to really help prevent some of those scenarios where you have to hit a server and go back. So that's, again, not in the 1.2 release, but coming soon, probably in a 1.3 preview as we get to it. But this is demonstrating some kind of cool stuff. So if you really were following along, and unfortunately, so Android Studio is booted up, and I'm not able to share this device, I'm afraid. So Dana, can you tell me, is this at all legible?
Not necessarily.
Should I get closer or further? Is it even like silly?
Can anyone see that? I don't.
Yeah, it's probably tricky because it's like a tiny. That's okay. The gist, though, that I'll explain, and just to kind of highlight that it's possible, is this is showing appointments, the same exact appointments that are on my screen. I'm just using an Android app to render them. But there's a third button. I've extended the template. So if I go into admin, I'll show you the appointment template. And I've got the button in here that is called a Contoso. So we have actions. We have action.showcard, action.submit, a new one called action toggle visibility. But this one is called, so if I show you in the JSON, it looks exactly like that. The type name is contoso.action.checkin. So this is not a requirement, but it's a convention that we recommend to namespace any custom types that you've added. So if we did add something called an action check-in and you didn't prefix it, you may have a conflict, right? If we start to add things in the future. So we're saying probably prefix it with your company, but it's a custom action. And this is demonstrating that the schema itself is extensible. So this action, and I wrote a little code, and I can show it how I extend it to show up in the designer. It's relatively straightforward, and this is the same pattern that you do in Android. So to extend the schema, and again, we're getting advanced. That's why the hope is that just bringing awareness to this feature and saying, okay, if you ever do want to do this, download this source code and it demonstrates it. That's why I'm going to briefly just run through it. But you basically write a class and you say it extends adaptive.action. This is the JavaScript version. You do the same thing on Android in Java. you write a class that extends this action, and you basically tell it how to parse the fields in it and then what to do. The same thing applies with elements. So if you want to write a custom element like a graph or a progress bar, you can always extend it. You just have to tell it how to render, and an action doesn't need to render because they're all buttons. But if you extend it with an element, you would say, how do I turn this JSON into native UI? And then all you do, and this is again the same thing, this is the JavaScript version, but the same thing would be if C# and Android, you say action type registry, register type, anytime you see this type name, return this action. So what's happening back on the home page is that action is not being displayed because this web browser doesn't know how to actually do it. But on Android, I implemented the action check-in action. So that's what's showing up here. And when I click on it, it goes to the form. And I'll just show you the form because you imagine it. So the scenario here is that this patient has just been referred to the clinic, but they haven't completed any intake forms. We don't know anything about them. So rather than hand them a clipboard, like we kind of do today, and you write on paper and then you stand there with the person, maybe transcribing it into the computer, what if they could just hand you a tablet? And, you click check in, hand you the tablet, they complete it all. I can edit that form right from my own admin interface. So this is the patient intake form. I can obviously modify this, add new inputs, add new data, and it would just get sent and updated to the tablet at all times. So kind of an advanced scenario, but just showing a little bit of the possibility of what you can do. You can reuse these templates, and the card can display itself as appropriate based on the characteristics of that device. So that's kind of the kitchen sink around all this. The other piece, just to raise awareness to, is this card is heavily using the 2.0 preview data binding stuff. So as I load this card, and we've demonstrated this a couple times, so if you're interested in more learning about the data binding, your first step would be go to vnext, and we have to fix the HTTPS version, so sorry about that. You go to vnext.adaptivecards.io, and there's a couple new panes that are not in the existing designer to show sample data and data binding. So this feature was influenced by blend and sample data, where you would template using XAML, but the sample data gives you a great design time experience. So when I edit this card, this referral card, I'm pre-populating it with sample data of a referral. So here's the patient name. This is the data. This is the data in anything that I want. You tell us what you describe your data, and then you bind to it. So here I'm saying this is an adaptive card image binding to patient.photo, and you can see the curly brace. So this card is showing the templated stuff, but this button, this preview mode, is kind of neat. It's going to take this and actually apply the sample data to show you what would happen. And so you're seeing, okay, here's the name. Someone, Joe at Appbot, when he was generating random names, instead of Matt Heidinger, he did Hat Mittinger, and I thought that was kind of a cool name. So this patient is, Hat Mittinger, and whether I'm insured or not, so if it's false, you'll see this red bar, and if I go to true, you'll see it now turns green. So there are some conditions available in the template. If I click on this, you can see only show when patient insured equals false. So you can write some expressions. So this one will show if they are insured, this one will show if they're not, and just showing the interactivity or the dynamicism of the template. And the truly neat thing is, okay, cool, I can write templating. What you're not really able to see on my Android tablet is rendering all those same things. So this template is stored in a database because it's just JSON, and it's downloaded live. So if I save this or just put this in an accent color, we want to now draw attention to the patient's name, and I hit save, and I go back to my home screen. You can see I've just live updated how I display patient referrals. I could tweak this in any way that I want. And now every device is automatically updated with that new template. When I refresh that Android and the scheduling manager is on their tablet, they'll see the updated pending referral template right there. So it's kind of a neat way, because these templates are expressed in JSON, you can really store them and distribute them to every device without writing any platform-specific code. So that's data binding. That's in the 2.0 preview. We are, at the same time we get out this Contoso Clinic project, we will release beta packages, preview packages for NuGet and JavaScript, possibly other platforms, so that you can play with the data binding SDKs. Right now, you have to jump through a few hoops. We can do it. We actually walked through it in the February community call. If you wind back, just search for Adaptive Cards community call February. We have steps on how you can actually, sorry, let me actually go to this. If you go to our GitHub, this is probably the best place if you really want to dive in. There's 2 pinned issues at the top. And one of them, so go to GitHub and then go to issues. Man, my machine's started telling me it's time to go on vacation because it has winded down. There's 2 pinned issues here. So here's the preview of data binding in Cards 2.0. It walks through some samples, basically our full kind of developer documentation for data binding. And then if you go down to SDK support, so this shows what you can do, how I did the $1 conditional, the designer support, walks through blah, 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 some advanced stuff, repeating items, functions that you can use. But then if you actually want to get started, this is where we want to remove some of this friction. Right now, you would have to clone the repo, check out this branch, and then build. And then effectively, this new API shows up. Whereas today, to render a card, you do adaptive card.fromJSON, and you pass in the card. This adds an overload where you pass in the template and then the data, and the data is just some data object, and it takes the 2, it takes the template and merges them, and then you get a card out of it. And so we walk through building that, and the solution here shows a bot that I built, a stock bot, so an end-to-end solution using data binding if you really want to dive in. But that said, we will release NuGet preview packages, so this API will be readily available without you jumping through hoops. So stay tuned for that before the next call. So that's a lap around the data binding stuff. A lot of exciting stuff coming through. I'll quickly just show the last piece, and probably this will be wrapping up unless anyone wants to see anything else. But let's take it just one step further and talk about this last column over here, which is this card. So this is generic cards. This is a weather card and a stock card. Very common scenario where I want to hit data. An endpoint, maybe it's an internal endpoint, maybe I'm all microservices and all of my services just return JSON over some REST, some HTTP endpoints, but maybe it's an external endpoint, so you do want to render weather. So in this case, we hit the Wonderground API, and in this case, we're hitting a stock API. So I want to show how easy it is to add in a new stock in here. So this portal is powered entirely by this app.json file. And so this is the JSON file that describes Contoso Clinic. It's just a file I made up. And there's an object in here, an array called home cards. So you're seeing the Microsoft quote and the weather. And just to demonstrate what's going to happen as I add a new one here, I'm going to say, let's hit, let's just, I don't know, see how Apple's doing. It's always the fun one. And the gist here is, again, I'm saying, here's the data, here's a template, and I'll quickly show what those look like. I think I clicked both of them, yeah. So this is a public API that a company offers to just get livestock quotes. So this is just pure data in a format that whatever they wanted. Traditionally, obviously, if I want to display this, I write a template. I write XAML templates. I write code to turn this into something displayable. So the other thing I clicked on was the template URL, and that's this. It's just a publicly hosted adaptive card template. You'll see it has some if conditions in here. So it says if the change, if as in the stock is up or down for the day, it shows an up arrow or a down arrow. And it also changes the color to either good or attention. So if we go back to Contoso Clinic, you'll see now Apple is in here. A new card just got added. And it just did those 2 things. I didn't do anything special. The code there is incredibly simple. If I go to home page and I see it's looping through that home card array. Template, And then on that callback, it gets the data. So this is just jQuery calls right here. And then I have a simple utility that says, okay, render that card. Here's the template. Here's the data in this home cards div. And the code for this, again, is pretty straightforward. It news up, it sets some properties, then it news up a card and renders the card. So all this code, that couple lines of code, a couple for loops, and a JSON object really lets me now add a whole bunch of these things. Obviously, I could have built an admin interface for this in the back end to say, hey, point to this stuff, point to these data endpoints. But this is kind of neat. This is the scenario that says, maybe that endpoint also returned an adaptive card template. Maybe the stock template provider, the stock API provider could return an adaptive card template. There's nothing special about it. It's just, as long as it's a public URL, there's nothing private in it. It's just a bunch of data bindings. The fact that I stored this in blob storage, you could imagine if this was just, templates.adaptivecards.io, and then we had one called stock, we had one called restaurant, we had a GitHub repository where the community could add templates, contribute to them, because they're just these flat JSON files. The fact that the template gets downloaded, no private data ever leaves the device. The binding all happens on the device. You can start distributing the load of who's building these templates. I can get templates from third parties, from other template providers. They can really come from anywhere, and my data just never has to leave. The data came from anywhere. In this case, it came from HTTP, but we don't prescribe HTTP. The data could have come from anywhere. So that's a quick lap around that whole app. Like I said, there's a lot in there. Hopefully the code, I'm trying to clean it up to make it just relatively straightforward, not using a lot of fancy stuff. Just to show if there are pieces of this that might be useful, like the integrated designer, like the data binding, like the data retrieval, et cetera, et cetera. This will be available soon. So I think that's basically it. If anyone wants to learn more, I'm happy to go through it. I do like to put this in. I mean, we have the adaptive cards team. I get to do a lot of the talking here. I don't hate that part. But it's all powered by a wonderful team who contributes all the time. A lot of the folks join this call, but it's all made powerful by this. And of course, you folks, part of the community, who are helping us set the direction. So I just always want to raise awareness to that. And then the kind of last part is you can find me on Twitter at Matt Heidinger. You can find David at dclo, and we'd love to hear from you.
Does anyone have any questions? Does anyone want to see anything? We have about 15 more minutes. Feedback, quiet today.
It's man. Build just ended, so I have to imagine some of our community was either there or potentially streaming it live. So hopefully that was useful for people. I mean, I definitely will. Let me actually just put that link in. That was a whirlwind around it. The session does go into more detail. Oh yeah, it's in this slide. So if you do want to, let me just pull up the YouTube. If you just search for this YouTube session, you can get the full details of us going through it.
And I put that link in the IM window, but we'll also add it to the blog summary. Let's see. Great presentation. Thanks, Matt. A question. Hope to see the build samples on GitHub soon. And everyone said they would definitely check out the build session.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
okay. Well, yeah, we'll see everyone second Thursday of the June. So I think it's June 13th. Like I said, I'm going to have those samples ready before then, and I'm going to maybe pressure some of our friends to see if anyone wants to give my voice a break, and we can kind of see how other people are doing stuff too. So please reach out to me if you'd be at all interested in sharing. It doesn't have to be long. If it wants to be 5 minutes, if it's something you think, was neat and the community would benefit from it, let us know.
Okay, a couple questions before we wrap up.
Cool.
Clifton asked if I'm correct that action.http in combination with HTTP flow is now officially supported.
Oh, that's actually still an actionable message only feature. It is not supported out of the box in adaptive cards. Right. Depends on the host. Yeah,
so Action HTTP is it must have come up 3 different times with people that I met at the conference this week. It's currently on our unofficial 1.3 backlog. Once the team gets settled from build, once we wrap up the 1.2 release, which will be any day now or has already been completed, we're going to start figuring out what's going to go in the 1.3 release. And I have to imagine Action HTTP is at least a really good contender.
Okay, sounds good. And Russell, I just posted the build link, the session link again from YouTube. So you can check that out there, and we'll make sure that's also in the blog summary in the next couple of days when we post the recording here. All right. Thanks everyone for joining.
Cool. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.